This week in Black History Makers, we're talking about the life and legacy of a woman named Prathia Hall. Let's get right to it. Prathia King, the wife of Dr. Martin Luther King, says that prayer was a constant and integral part of the epic struggle for freedom in the African American community. From the hulls of slave ships to the auction block to the fields, you could hear prayers being uttered. You could hear prayers in the songs as they followed the drinking, or you could hear prayers being spoken after horrible injustices during the Jim Crow and the antebellum era. But when you get to the civil rights movement, you start to see this thing called organized prayer. Historians have noted that there were thousands and thousands of prayer meetings called together in churches all across America, praying for equal rights and civil rights for the African American community. People prayed as they sat at lunch counters during sit-ins, and also when white churches would have prayer meetings, they would have pray-ins. In 1957, there was a prayer pilgrimage for freedom on the steps of the Washington Monument, as nearly 25,000 people gathered together to pray for their freedom. On Easter morning in 1963, thousands of people knelt in prayer in Birmingham, Alabama. In 1965, as thousands of people marched across the Edmund Pettus Bridge from Selma, Alabama, when they encountered the state troopers, they knelt in prayer in the middle of the bridge. People prayed for hope, prayed for forgiveness, and prayed for change. It was a hallmark of the civil rights era. But for all these inspiring examples, my favorite prayer is a prayer that you've heard that you didn't even know was a prayer. It was prayed by a lady named Prathia Hall. Prathia Hall was born in 1940. She was the daughter of a Baptist preacher, and she grew up in predominantly white schools in the Northeast United States. While she was in college, she learned of the nonviolent protest and became an activist in the civil rights era. Prathia joined the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee and began to work tirelessly on voters' rights. She canvassed neighborhoods trying to bring up voter registration, and also spread the word about freedom schools where people could learn what they needed to learn in order to pass their voter registration test. And all the while, the SNCC would practice nonviolent protests and pray outside of jailhouses and courthouses all across the South. And right there in the middle of the group, you would see Prathia kneeling in prayer. It wasn't without resistance. Prathia was jailed dozens of times because of her work with the SNCC. She was shot at by police and shot at and hit in the arm when night riders fired into an SNCC meeting. Prathia became known as a woman of prayer, the way she prayed inside and outside of the jailhouse. She prayed on the Edmund Pettus Bridge. She prayed with SNCC demonstrations. In 1962, after a church was burned down by the Ku Klux Klan in Terrell County, Georgia, there was a prayer meeting that was gathered together in Mount Olive Baptist Church. And at that prayer meeting, Prathia was given the opportunity to pray. She got up and she began to pray her prepared prayer. But something came over her, the Spirit of God came upon her, and she just began to pray from the heart and call out to God for justice. During that prayer, she said a phrase, "I have a dream." And she would talk about the future that she was asking God for. And she would repeat it, "I have a dream." And she would lament the past, "I have a dream." In the audience at that prayer meeting was a man named Dr. Martin Luther King. That phrase that Dr. King heard stuck with him. 1 year later, when thousands and thousands of people gathered at the Washington Monument, Dr. King went up to give his speech. He had two speeches prepared, one that talked about funding and finances and banking, and then one that talked about a dream. As Dr. King got up there and began to give his speech, he greeted the crowd, and then one young lady called out, "Tell him about the dream." And in the spur of the moment, Dr. King decided to tell the crowd about a prayer that he heard from a woman named Prathia Hall. "I have a dream." That means that every time you and I hear that famous phrase, "I have a dream," you and I are hearing the words of a prayer spoken by a lady named Prathia Hall. But not only that, you and I also believe that when we pray with others, the Spirit of God intercedes or speaks through us to other people. So not only are we speaking to God, but God is speaking through us to those who hear us. So when you and I hear "I have a dream," not only are we hearing Martin Luther King speak, not only are we hearing Prathia's prayer, we are hearing the Spirit of God intercede on the behalf of his people, calling out for justice. And today in your discussions, you're going to look at one of Prathia Hall's favorite prayers from the Old Testament. And I think looking now through the lens of Prathia's life will give you a new perspective on some of these words. At the end of your time together then, you're going to pray some of the prayers from famous black Christian leaders throughout history, from the Civil War era to the Civil Rights era. And I think as you put some of their words and their prayers into your mouth, not only will you understand the struggle better, but you'll learn to pray better. I'm excited for you guys. Have a great discussion, and thanks, and we'll see you soon.